Australia is not just about beaches and kangaroos. It's also a big wine-producing country. While many assume that Australian wine is just big, robust red wine or cheap critter wines, Australia is actually an extremely diverse country, and within driving distance from big cities like Sydney and Melbourne, you can find world-class wines, including elegant expressions of Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and more. Recently, I spent 2 weeks visiting Australia, and while I was there, I visited 3 exciting wine regions. So in this video, I'm going to share my journey and what I learned along the way. So whether you're a wine enthusiast or you're just looking for your next great travel adventure, this video will leave you thirsty for more. Following the grueling 14-hour flight, I needed to rest up a bit before heading to wine country. So I enjoyed some of the highlights in Sydney, including the world-famous Sydney Harbour. In my view, the best way to experience the Sydney Harbour and some of the local attractions was through a lunchtime cruise. And the lunch was extremely enjoyable, and better still, I was able to enjoy a bottle of the Tyrrell Chardonnay, which paired perfectly with the local seafood and was a great way to get a sneak preview of the wine tasting experience to follow the next day. After a good night's sleep, it was off to wine country, and my journey started out in Hunter Valley, which is one of Australia's oldest wine regions and which is about a 2.5-hour drive from Sydney. I like to say that the best is good enough, so I went directly to Tyrrell's, which was recently recognized as the #1 winery in all of Australia. Tyrrell's is a historic family-owned winery that was founded way back in 1858. Tyrrell's is currently run by the 5th generation, namely Chris Tyrrell, the Chief Executive Officer, but the 4th generation, Chris's father Bruce, is still very much involved. My visit started out with a tour of the vineyards that was led by Bruce himself. This was a very special vineyard tour, as Tyrrell's has a number of blocks of vineyards that are extremely old. Many of them are more than 100 years old, in fact, and are some of the oldest grapevines in the entire world. Old vines are prized because they can often make wine that offers greater complexity than wine that's made from younger vines. Following the vineyard tour, Chris Tyrrell took over and provided a tour of the wine cellar and explained the winemaking philosophy for Tyrrell's. The highlight of the cellar tour was definitely the barrel tasting. This was an opportunity to try some wines that are currently under development and not yet ready for release. Despite the fact that these were not finished wines, they were already extremely enjoyable, and a couple of the samples even included some of the wine that's being made from some of the prized old vines that we had just seen in the vineyard. After the winery tour, we went straight to the tasting room for a proper sit-down tasting with Bruce and Chris Tyrrell. Hunter Valley is famous for its unique expression of Semillon, and in my opinion, Tyrrell's makes the best Semillon in all of Hunter Valley. The Tyrrell's VAT 1 Semillon is particularly impressive, as this Semillon is made from some of the oldest Semillon vines that Tyrrell's has, including vines that date way back to 1923. If you're not familiar with Hunter Valley Semillon, it's light-bodied, bone-dry, high in acidity, and extremely low in alcohol, with only around 10 to 11% alcohol by volume. While Hunter Valley Semillon can be somewhat neutral in its youth, it becomes truly special with extended aging and develops intriguing flavors and aromas like fig, toast, and honey. For that reason, Tyrrell's actually matures its Semillon at the winery for a number of years before it's released. While most wineries release their white wine within a year or two after harvest, the current release of the Tyrrell's VAT 1 Semillon is the 2018. Tyrrell's practice of maturing the VAT 1 Semillon at the winery for a number of years before release actually has a really interesting backstory. Back in 1989, Bruce actually hid 1,000 cases of VAT 1 Semillon from his father in the back of the warehouse. Once that wine was finally released in 1996, everyone was able to see how much the wine had evolved and how much more enjoyable the VAT 1 Semillon was with some additional bottle aging. So that I would be able to experience for myself how this Semillon evolves, they let me taste 3 vintages that span 10 years, the 2014, the 2018, and the 2024 vintage. While all 3 of these wines showed extremely well, the 2018 was particularly enjoyable as it was extraordinarily vibrant that day. This impressive VAT 1 Semillon sells for around $65 to $70 per bottle, but Tyrrell's also has an extremely enjoyable entry-level Semillon that sells for closer to $20 to $25. If you're someone who's taking a wine certification exam, such as a WSET course, you'll definitely want to be familiar with Hunter Valley Semillon, as this is an extremely common topic with the examiners. Hunter Valley isn't just about wine, however. They also have some impressive cheese and chocolate shops, as well as some outstanding restaurants, one of which I enjoyed on the way back. Following 3 days in Sydney, it was on to Melbourne, which I finally learned how to pronounce correctly. My hotel was in a vibrant area of the city, close to Chinatown, so before heading to the next wine region, I explored the city a little bit and attended a soft opening for an exciting new Asian fusion restaurant. One quick tip if you head to Melbourne, you'll definitely want to come prepared with an umbrella and a variety of clothes. They say that you can experience 4 seasons in just one day in Melbourne, and I definitely found that to be true. The next morning, it was on to Yarra Valley, which is a little more than an hour away from Melbourne, depending on traffic. Yarra Valley has a relatively cool climate, which is ideal for the production of high-quality Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. My first stop was Oak Ridge Wines, which produced a wine that was just named Wine of the Year, and which received the recognition of Australia's Best Winery in 2023, the year before Tyrrell's won that recognition. Oak Ridge has a stunning tasting room with dramatic views of the vineyards and Yarra Valley generally. Some of my favorites were the wines that were produced from the Henk Vineyard. While the Henk Vineyard was only planted in 2008, it's already producing a number of very enjoyable wines. For example, the Henk Vineyard Pinot Noir and Chardonnay were some of the best values of the entire trip, and the Henk Vineyard Aqueduct wines, both Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, were definitely some of my favorites and the standouts in the Oak Ridge tasting. The Yarra Valley Pinot Noir was impressive, and the best comparable I have is probably Willamette Valley Pinot Noir, which is a good thing, as I very much enjoy that as well. The Chardonnay was also impressive, and it was extremely fresh and vibrant with relatively high acidity for a Chardonnay. In addition to wine, Oak Ridge also has a world-class restaurant that is among the finest in the region. They even dry age their own beef and produce a substantial amount of the produce for the restaurant from their own garden right on site. Oak Ridge is definitely a high-end winery. You can even travel to Oak Ridge from Melbourne by helicopter. Sadly, I didn't take a helicopter to Yarra Valley, but the good news is I didn't drive either. They actually have a great service called a Hop It tour. And just as with tours of big cities, this tour will take you directly from Melbourne to wine country, and then they have a circuit where they go from winery to winery, and you can just get on and off and visit the wineries that you choose. This works great, and it definitely saves you a lot of hassle and expense. My other winery visit in Yarra Valley was to Giant Steps. If that name sounds familiar to you, that's also the name of a famous John Coltrane album. The name for this winery was inspired by the founder's love for jazz. Giant Steps is a world-class producer of both Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. Giant Steps has a swanky tasting room right in town where you can enjoy a single vineyard wine tasting experience. This tasting allows you to try all the various Chardonnay and Pinot Noir wines that Giant Steps makes, each of which are made with fruit from a different vineyard. This tasting is particularly insightful as it allows you to experience firsthand just how differently Chardonnay and Pinot Noir can taste, even when they're made from the same grape and in the exact same way, just based on differences in the vineyard, such as the soils, the climate, the sun exposure, and so forth. Giant Steps made some of my absolute favorite Pinot Noir of the entire trip, but I particularly enjoyed both the Sexton Vineyard and the Applejack Vineyard expressions of both the Pinot Noir and the Chardonnay. Before heading to the next wine region, I took a day to do the Great Ocean Road tour, which is an absolute must when you're in Melbourne. The Great Ocean Road provides one of the world's most stunning coastal drives. It's 150 miles long. In addition to walking through a rainforest and enjoying fish and chips with fish that was caught just a few hours earlier, I was able to take a helicopter ride and get a bird's eye view of the 12 Apostles, which are large natural rock formations that are lined up along the coast. On the way back to Melbourne, we even saw some wild koala bears along the road, and we indulged our sweet tooth at a chocolate factory. The next wine region was Mornington Peninsula, which features cool climate coastal vineyards just about an hour south of Melbourne. Due to the cooling coastal breezes and other cooling influences, Mornington Peninsula experiences a long, slow ripening period. This allows the grapes to develop slowly over time, which allows them to gain additional complexity while still retaining freshness and acidity. The result is Pinot Noir and Chardonnay with elegance and precision. I also visited 2 wineries in Mornington Peninsula, the first of which was 10 minutes by tractor. The name comes from the fact that the winery's original 3 vineyards were all 10 minutes apart if you traveled by tractor. After tasting it 10 minutes by tractor, my takeaway was that the Pinot Noir from Mornington Peninsula can be extremely light and ethereal. In addition, it also seems like there can be substantial vintage variation because the climate here is quite unpredictable and varies dramatically from one year to the next. I found that I particularly enjoyed the Chardonnay from the cooler vintages since it had more freshness and acidity, but that I enjoyed the Pinot Noir from the warmer vintages because it had more intensely concentrated fruit flavors and was more flavorful. 10 minutes by tractor also had an impressive estate Pinot Gris that's not at all like the neutral, boring examples you can get by the glass at certain restaurants. The next Mornington Peninsula winery I visited was 10 minutes away, not by tractor, but by sprinter van. Founded in 1978, Stonier Winery was one of the pioneering wineries in Mornington Peninsula. A couple years ago, they hired a talented winemaker named Julian Grounds, formerly of Craggy Range in New Zealand, to be their new technical director and winemaker. The highlight of the visit to Stonier was definitely a tasting in the winery with Julian, where we discussed his approach to winemaking and tasted through the Stonier lineup. It was particularly interesting to try some of the wines that had been released several years ago before Julian had arrived, with some of the 2023 and 2024 wines that he produced from those exact same vineyards, and which reflected Julian's different approach to winemaking. At Stonier, I found that my favorite wines included the KBS Chardonnay and the Reserve Pinot Noir. While I'm at it, if you're a wine lover, you'll definitely want to visit a restaurant called Francois when you're in Melbourne. Francois was once recognized in the world's 50 best restaurants in the world. Francois is particularly good to visit on Monday afternoon at lunch because they allow BYO corkage free at that time. When I arrived at Francois and checked in, the server said, "Welcome to paradise," and those words proved prophetic. At Francois, I was able to enjoy escargot, duck l'orange, beef bourguignon, and some amazing profiteroles that were prepared tableside. The duck and the beef paired perfectly with the wine that I took along, specifically the 2018 Levantine Hill Colleen's Paddock Yarra Valley Pinot Noir. The extra bottle age for this Pinot Noir allowed it to develop some additional complexity, and this was definitely an extremely enjoyable wine. Despite the fact that it was just lunch on a Monday, the atmosphere at Francois was extremely festive, and there were several rousing renditions of Happy Birthday. Of course, it wouldn't be a trip to Australia without kangaroos. In addition to seeing a group of wild kangaroos crossing the street in Hunter Valley, on the way back from the Great Ocean Road tour, we also saw a field with dozens and dozens of them. I highly recommend a visit to Australia, and I'm very glad that I finally made the trip. If you're thinking about a visit to Napa Valley, and you're interested in some of my winery recommendations, be sure to check out this video that's linked above.